Hey, cool. Good morning. Thank you very much. That was very kind, Sam. It's great to be together. Great to be on site and online if you're joining us as well. Thank you so much for jumping in and joining us today. It's just cool to be able to do this. So what a joy and a delight. I was going to ask you to raise your hand and show me by a show of hands if you've ever had an argument. But yeah, yes you have. Yes you have. Yeah, yes you have. Yes you have. It's something that we've probably all done. The other day, Beth was saying to me that, we wouldn't have so many arguments. We would have much less arguments if I wasn't so pedantic. And I said, well, surely you mean fewer. I was chatting to a friend the other day heatedly, and we had an argument over which vowel was the best one. I won. I've even been in one of those arguments where you sort of don't understand how something which was so little became so large, and then all of a sudden you sort of think, what were we fighting about in the first place? Or maybe you get to that point where you're with someone and you think, oh my gosh, what were we even fighting for? And I don't know if you've ever had that, but it's not really a good feeling to think, okay, I've come to the end of something and I'm not even remember how we got here. It's not really a good thing to know that at the end of something you get there and you're not sure why you were even fighting in the first place. And that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. What are we even fighting for? Throughout July, we've done a series all about freedom, looking at some of this idea of freedom and digging into it. So Sam and I have been unpicking some of these concepts of what freedom looks like, what freedom means. And if we're going to summarize the idea of freedom for us in the West, because we hate people telling us what we can and cannot do, and we hate people saying you should do this or shouldn't do that. We just hate it anyway. But really, if you're going to summarize what most people would say is true freedom is the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, so long as I'm not hurting anyone. That's kind of really the most general, basic understanding of the idea of freedom. And if you've missed any of those sessions, I encourage you, just go online, jump onto YouTube. You can catch all the sessions. They get edited very well by Mark, and he tidies them up a bit, so you can go back online and watch them and just catch all the missing stuff that you've done. But I have to just give you a little caveat at the beginning. What I have on my heart to share this morning was where we knew this theme was going, the whole trajectory of it, and I really feel passionate about it. Now, what that means is that's code for preacher speak that he might go on a bit. So I'm telling you up front, it might be just a little bit longer than normally. But if you're not yet a follower of Jesus, I'm so glad you're here. And here's why. Because you are going to be like a fly on the wall. You get to lean in and listen in, and you get to hear what it really means to be a follower of Jesus. Because you need to know what it really means to really be a follower of Jesus. And that's such a helpful conversation to have. So I'm so glad that you're here. If you're in the building, if you're watching online, and you're just exploring faith and you're wondering what it means to follow Jesus, this is so perfect that you're here because you get to discover more about what it really, really means and what the requirements are to follow Jesus. What it means to take seriously this call to give your life to something worth fighting for. Don't we all want that? Don't we all want our lives to mean something? We all want purpose. We all want our lives to we want to reach the end of our lives and feel like we've got something bigger, that we accomplish something. We don't want to reach the end and think, wow, what were we even doing? How did we even get here? What were we even fighting for? We don't want to reach the end and feel like that. But let's also be honest, because if we're going to talk about being freedom fighters, which was the name of our theme, and faith, isn't that such a tricky thing to put together? Because, let's be really honest, religion and violence are not a very good mix. Right? We can all think of examples in the present, in our modern lifetimes, people who, because of their beliefs, they went to extremes and they hurt other people. They blew up buildings and planes and cars and hurt other people. It still happens all around the world. You could find it. Just Google what's going on all around the world. There are people that are still taking their beliefs to such an extreme that they think it's right to hurt somebody else because of their beliefs. And we don't even have to go back that far in history, but we can go back in history, and it happened over and over and over again. I mean, you remember the thing called the Crusades, where all of a sudden it became okay for anyone who was a follower of Jesus to go and kill somebody who wasn't? Or how about the Inquisitions, where it was okay for people who said they were followers of Jesus to torture people so they could get confessions out of them. We don't have to go that far back to discover that religion and violence aren't a very good mix. And we know that. So how do we even talk about this idea? And a really, really good place to start is this guy named Paul. He was originally known as Saul. And the reason that we're going to look at him is because he actually had a foot in both camps. Because he was what we would refer to as someone who's a fundamentalist or an extremist, maybe even a terrorist. We would think of him nowadays as someone who took their belief systems to such an extreme that they actually thought it was okay to hurt someone else. That's fundamentalism. Okay, that's extremism. And Paul was in that camp. And so we're just going to lean into him and find out why Paul thought he had something worth fighting for. Because he used to think he did. And the first time you hear about Saul, which if you're not a follower of Jesus, this is an amazing thing about the Bible. The Bible is full of honest people who lived honest lives in real times. There's so much historical evidence to prove that Paul was a real person. In fact, Paul's a very popular name nowadays, and this is why. Okay? You can visit lots of places where he's been, all around the Mediterranean. But the Bible's full of his honest backstory, which I would hate to be told about me. But here he is. And before he met Jesus, he was a zealot. He was an extreme person. He had extreme beliefs. He arrested people, tortured them, put them to death, threw them in prison. And the first time you hear about him is in this book called Acts. And the book of Acts is actually like a history book. It's like the early church history. So you can find out about how the early church started and what was going on and these people trying to figure out what we do now. And the first time you hear about Saul is when he is there while this guy's been arrested. And this dude that's been arrested, his name is Stephen. And you know what Stephen used to do? Stephen used to look after the widows and make sure that people got their food properly. I mean, like, it's a pretty horrible thing to pick on him, right? I mean, what a good thing that Stephen's doing. And yet he's the one that gets arrested. He gets falsely accused. He gets dragged before the courts. They beat him up. They drag him outside. And then they stone him to death, which is a horrible way to die. And it says that Saul approved of his execution. And then later on, it carries on. It says, Saul began ravaging the church, arresting the men and the women, because men and women this is what is distinctive about the early church. Men and women both involved in equal footing in a lot of ways. Men and women were being arrested and thrown into prison. He thought he had something worth fighting for. It doesn't stop there. And then Saul takes it up a level. So it says he goes to the high priest and he gets permission. And he gets permission from the high priest to basically say, right, give me the right and the authority to go and arrest all the men and women I can find who follow Jesus. We're going to arrest them. We're going to drag them. We're going to bring them back bound to Jerusalem. He's got his marching orders. He's got his commission. He is a religious zealot. He's got the papers to do it, and he is off on his way. And if you want to read about this is in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 6 through 9. You could read about the story yourself. And he was on a mission, and he thought he had something worth fighting for. Now, I'm condensing a long story, but anyway, Paul's on this horse, and he's charging out, trying to find people. And then this bright light appears in a loud voice, and it knocks him literally off the horse. He falls down. He's blind. He hears this voice crying out from heaven, and he has this encounter with God. And in this crazy encounter where he's totally helpless because he's off his horse, he's blind, it's bright lights, he can't see what's going on, he's totally disorientated. And in that moment, instead of God deciding to pummel him with lightning and destroy him, like you might have heard about, that's what God was like, because maybe there's some stories about like that in the Old Testament, where people didn't do quite what he liked, and somehow it seemed like he just destroyed them. And so here we have this guy, this evil person who's destroying the church, and he falls off his horse, and he's totally helpless. And wouldn't this be a perfect moment for God to prove himself as such a powerful being, and he could lightning zap and just pummel this guy into the ground? And instead of that happening, he's given mercy and grace, because there's no more punishment. After Jesus came on the cross, there's no more punishment. Mercy and grace is given to Paul. Okay? But it doesn't stop there. Paul, who's now blind and helpless. Now, I have to just give a little cultural caveat here. If you were blind at that time, you were ineffective. Okay? There's no social system. There's no support system. As soon as he became blind, he became unemployable. He could not do anything that he used to do before. He had no more social value. That he then would have to sit and beg. There was nothing for people to do who were in that position, other than find other blind people and huddle together and try to figure out what we can do to survive. His life, as he knew it, was totally over. No good, nothing hopeful for the future. And Saul is there, and he's blind. And this guy named Ananias, who's a follower of Jesus, is praying. And Ananias feels this burden in his heart to go and pray for Saul. And you can read about it. And he says, oh, no way, I'm not doing that. Isn't this the same guy that's out to destroy the church? And he gets challenged again to go pray for Saul and go see him. And he goes to see Saul, and he greets him, and he says, my brother. And he lays his hands on him, and it says he prays for him. And Ananias shows the same mercy and kindness, because what a perfect moment for Ananias to have brought a knife and stick it in his back. I mean, what a perfect time, right? If it'd be like, just imagine if you could like take somebody out who is like this type of person. Ananias could have done it right there and right then. He's been told where the guy is. He's blind and he's helpless. He can't do anything. And instead of Ananias coming to slit his throat, he actually puts his hands on him. He greets him and he says, my brother. And the same mercy and grace and kindness that Paul received from God, he receives from Ananias. And in that moment, it says the scales fell off his eyes and he began to see things in a totally different way. Everything about his life was restored, but everything about his life was different. It would never, ever be the same again. The scales came off. He can work again. He's not blind anymore. But he can't go back to doing what he did before because he's had an encounter with God which was totally different to everything else that he had expected. It changed everything. And so what he does, he literally changed his name. He was Saul, and now he became Paul. And because of Jesus, he found something worth fighting for. I mean, he spent the next 30 years of his life traveling around the Mediterranean, planting churches, meeting people, writing letters, giving of his life. He was whipped and beaten and stoned and shipwrecked and thrown into prison and bit by snakes. I mean, he just had a crazy, crazy life. And 30 odd years later, he was actually put to death himself by the Romans because of his beliefs. See, he found something worth fighting for. And it's Paul who wrote loads of the letters to the church. And in this book that we call the Bible, which is actually a collection of books, it's 66 books put together in one big one. It's like a little mini library in your hand. That's really what it is. Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament, or the second part of the book, if you like, the second half. It's Paul. This is the dude that wrote most of these letters. And he is also the same one where we get all of this military language. A couple of times he writes to people and he says, my fellow soldiers, my fellow soldiers. He writes to churches and calls them his fellow soldiers. He writes to people, calls them his fellow soldiers. He talks about earning a wage for the work that they do. He talks about faith being like putting on the armor of God. It's Paul that gives the picture and the illustration of the church as being an army. He talks about battle and warfare and facing enemies. He uses specific military commands in his writing. We don't know that because we just read it in English, but at the time, some of the things he wrote were actual specific military commands. Here's some examples. Fight the good fight, stay strong, hold your ground, be steady, stay alert. All of those were written as emphatic, and they were military commands. Like, stand at attention, yes sir. He's using military language in his letters, military illustrations in his letters, and he's calling people soldiers and part of an army. But surely he wasn't telling the early church to start torturing people, start hurting people, and start doing the things that he used to do. And we know that he wasn't doing that because there is no historical record. There's no evidence of the early church ever behaving like that. Ever. You can look it up. Google it. It's fine. Look it up. People say, oh, the church is so horrible because they did so many bad things. They did so much violence. They did so much stuff like that. Hey, listen up. That's not how it started. It's not how it started. So just because something went a bit further on doesn't mean it started that way. So look it up yourself. We're clever, we're people, we've got loads of resources, we can look it up. The early church never, ever did that. In fact, the early church was known for the opposite. The early church was known for rushing into the mess, going into situations that they never should have gone into, welcoming people that they never should have welcomed. The church was known for something different than the way everybody else was functioning. That was really what was going on. So there's no historic record of the church ever behaving in a way that endorsed violence or hurting anyone else. So even though Paul is using military language after military language and military term after military term, he's not telling people to take up a sword and hurt anyone. And God forbid that we should ever twist stuff in that way. Just think of imperialism. It happens, okay? We do twist the scriptures and use it to justify our means. Now, it's near the end of his life. Paul's under arrest. He's in prison, and he knows he's near the end of his life. He knows it. And if you're near the end of your life, what would you do? Like, who would you contact? What would you do? What would you make right? Who would you write to? Is there anybody at the end of your life that you would want to make sure, we're clear here, we got this settled? Or maybe you're at the end of your life and you want to make sure, hey, I've been working for 33 years, just investing everything I can into local churches everywhere. What am I going to pass on? He's not after a statue being built or a memorial being built, but what is he going to put into people's hearts to carry on? What is he going to leave as his legacy? And so he chooses to write a letter. And he writes a letter to a guy named Timothy. And Timothy is in the Bible. You can read it yourself, actually. We've got a copy of it. It survived. And it's called 2 Timothy. And it's his last letter that he ever wrote. And it's also his most personal. The language used in the letter is the most intimate. It's the most personal. He says to Timothy, it starts out, my beloved son. And a bit later on, he says it again, my dear son. He talks about Timothy's mom and Timothy's grandmother, these two ladies named Eunice and Lois. He talks about them by name. Talks about the investment that his mother and grandmother had in him as a young man. Not bad for somebody who most people think disregarded the influence of women in the church. But anyway, let's just leave that for now. The letter is so encouraging. He also writes to him and he says, my son, be strong. Don't be afraid or ashamed of the gospel. It's like he's saying, you got this. There's a famous verse he says as well later on. He says this to Timothy. He says, you don't have a spirit of fear. God's not giving you fear. God's giving you power and love and a sound mind. He's encouraging him. This letter is personal. This letter is encouraging. You got this. And then the letter becomes challenging because he then changes tack and he says, join with me like a good soldier. Join with me in the suffering of Jesus, so no one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian matters, but rather works to please his commanding officer. Well, the context is local church. It's not being in an army, is it? The context is local church. Paul's a local church planter writing to a local church leader. So the context is local church. Paul wasn't a general and Timothy wasn't a captain. Okay, the context, the filter. The application is local church, and he's reminding Timothy what it's worth fighting for. And Paul says, join with me like a good soldier. Join with me like a good soldier. We're going to pick a couple phrases out of this verse. You see, an army is a collective. It's a pack. It's a corps. It's a body. It's a gang. It's a band of brothers. Join with me like a good soldier. And when you become a soldier, my brother was in the U.S. Army for a number of years. But when he became a soldier, he became part of something bigger than just himself. You don't sign up and agree to become a soldier and then not actually be part of the armed forces. You can't be a soldier and then not be part of the army. It's impossible. It shouldn't happen. You've seen... Well, anyway, it shouldn't happen. You become part of something bigger than you. It's a collective that works together, and nobody wants a rogue soldier. Nobody wants a lone ranger. And Paul, his context, again, is local church. And the crazy thing about Paul, Paul's at the end of his life. He's done 34 years, estimate, of being involved and giving his life to local church. And he never outgrew it. He actually never got so mature that he outgrew it. He never got so spiritual that he no longer needed actual local community with real people in real places. He never got so arrogant that he thought he was somehow no longer in humility and needing one another. In fact, Paul kind of does the opposite. Paul, he pushes this idea that it's totally impossible. It's totally impossible to be a soldier and not be part of the army. It's impossible. You just can't. You can't do it. You can't take a break from it. If you're a soldier, you're part of the army. We don't need Lone Rangers, and we're not after rogue soldiers. Paul's life work was spending his life planting local churches and equipping people in local settings to get on with the business of the local church. That was Paul's life, his passion. But going back to that phrase that he used, he says, join with me in the suffering as a good soldier. I mean, you probably preferred it a second ago and I left that bit out. We kind of it would be nice to just drop out that join with me in the suffering phrase. And I looked that word up. You know what it means? Suffering. It means face hardship, troubles, endure affliction. I don't know about you, but sometimes we do want a life without those things. Let's just be honest. We prefer an easy life. I do. I would. So many times I'd like things to be easier. But Paul is challenging Timothy. He's reminding Timothy at the end of his life. It's like, dude, man, if you're a soldier, you're part of the army, and it's not easy. It's not easy. And if you want to explore what it means to be a follower of Jesus, I'd love to tell you it's going to be easy. I'd love to tell you that following Jesus is now going to make your life so much more better and actually make it easier. In fact, in so many ways, it's actually going to make it harder because you're going to have to learn to forgive. You're going to have to learn to love people that you hate. You're going to have to learn to die to yourself. And that's not easy stuff. You don't have to do it on your own because we're here learning together. But I wish I could just tell you some sort of message that sounds too good to be true. And tells you that if you follow Jesus and give him your money, everything about your life is going to be perfect. I'm sorry, but that ain't in the scripture. Paul's saying, join with me in the suffering like a soldier. If you're going to be a soldier, you're part of the army, and it's hard work. And it's hard work because it takes more than just belief. You could believe Jesus is a good guy. You could believe Jesus was a great teacher, but somehow it has to change something within you, and that's tough. It's not easy. It's inconvenient. And I could buy a pair of camouflage jeans, but that wouldn't make me a soldier, really, yeah? There's stuff that we got to learn and stuff that we got to do as we follow. You don't just believe, you also act. Following Jesus isn't a philosophy that we adopt. It's actually, your life is totally different, just like Saul's. Saul had a trajectory of his life. He had an encounter with Jesus, and his life totally changed. He saw things differently and he did things differently. That's what happens when we follow Jesus. And the benefit doesn't come easy. It's hard work sometimes. The victory is something that we fight for. And you train and you work and there's fatigue and then there's pain. It's not always easy. But you got this. You can do it. God has not given you a spirit of fear. He's given you power and love and a sound mind. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Remember how Paul started his letter? Yeah, it's tough work. It's hard work, but you got this. Come on. You can do it. And I was kind of thinking, well, why is it like hard work? And then there's the other phrase that Paul puts in that verse. He says, because it's easier to get entangled in civilian matters. Join with me in the suffering like a good soldier. No one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian matters, but rather works to please their commanding officer. And I just kind of brainstormed a bit. A civilian matter is something that takes your focus away. So for a soldier who's got a specific task, there's a specific focus. But a civilian matter would take your focus away because a civilian matter is different to the other focus. I was thinking, well, what takes our focuses away? Sort of what pulls us away? And I began to realize, well, if I'm really perfectly honest, I try to be honest all the time, but if I'm really honest, I guess an easy thing is to think about self first. You see, if a soldier thinks about themselves, then that takes them away from the purpose. There are such incredible men and women who were part of the Normandy landings. And at some point you had to say, I am as scared as all get out, but I'm jumping out this boat and I'm running on the beach even though everything around me, everyone's being mown down. See, a civilian matter says I'm staying in that boat and I'm not jumping on, I'm not going to jump out. I'm not going to go help somebody else because of my own whatever. See, that's a civilian matter. We get entangled in civilian matters, pulled into self, which distracts and defers and detracts from the purpose. I think and it's human nature. It's totally human nature, isn't it? We'd rather take stronger and stronger painkillers sometimes than deal with the real source of the pain. It's true. I'd rather blame my partner for problems in our relationship rather than deal with the junk in my own life. If you've ever done any marriage counseling or couple counseling, it's always the other person's fault. It's amazing. I tell you what, it always happens. It just always happens. Okay? It's like I got to deal with the fact that my kids are so horrible rather than the fact that actually what in me is coming out. What is it? So they're not behaving the way I want them. What in me is coming out? You'd rather that I pray for you to find a good job again rather than deal with the fact that you keep losing job after job after job because you're not a very dependable person. But you'd rather me pray for you and say, I really pray that this job works out for you and you get a good interview and you get you see what I mean? We all like the easy way out. We'd all like the easy way. We just do, don't we? We'd rather win £1 million on the lottery rather than learn how to budget our money and be responsible with what little we have. We all want the easy way. I hope that makes sense. These are civilian matters. We can easily get distracted. But I'll still have the cream cake as opposed to work on my diet. No, just kidding. Diets are harder than cream cakes, yes. No, anyway. It's easy to make excuses. That's a civilian matter. It's easy to make excuses and justify our actions. I can do church on my own. I can do podcasts. I can do books. I can do worship music. I can do sermons. In fact, we have got so much incredible content. There's so much content. It's amazing. You can have so much content. You could sit in your room on your own for 24 hours, 7 days a week, and not have to interact with any other human being in the world. And some of you are thinking, yes, please. I can do it on my own. And I can find the messages that I like. I can find the preachers that I like. I can find the ones that don't challenge me. Hey, I know what. I'll find the preachers that tell me faith is 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, and if I follow a certain formula and do things in a certain way, then everything works out for me. And I can just ignore the ones that actually challenge me and provoke me to think about things that are going on in my heart rather than things that are going on in the future, going out in the world. The people that actually challenge the issues that are going on in here, because that's where the real challenges always are. It's easy to take the easy way out. It's easy to avoid committing to something or serving or getting stuck in a small group, which small groups are going to start up again in September. Over the summer, we've got loads of socials going on. But if you've not yet done it, just show up. Just commit to be there. Commit for 4 weeks. I'm going to be there. Make a choice. Commit. Just commit. Yeah? Church is messy. People hurt my feelings. There's nobody my age. I don't like what's going on. There's so many easy excuses that we can find. It's so easy. And here's one that we might have said or heard somebody else say. Church is just messy. Church is messy. And I know that. And do you know why church is messy? Because life is messy. Life is messy. Let me just read you some of this stuff. 1 out of 4 people experience mental health problems per year. 1 out of 6 people experience anxiety or depression in any given week. That's according to Mind UK. 1 out of 5 say they are often or always lonely. That's according to Age UK. 24% of parents have reported that they always or often feel lonely. That's according to Action for Children. Less than half of people between the ages of 17 and 25 said they actually felt loved. That's according to Action for Children again. 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual abuse. That's the crime survey for England and Wales. And 8.3 million people in the UK are living with debt that they cannot repay, including everyday household bills. And that's according to the National Audit Office. And every single one of those figures is pre-COVID. And you tell me church is messy. Yes, because it should be. Because life is messy and people are experiencing mess. And we need to be people who are messy. And if this church is not messy, then we are doing something wrong. And if you're not happy being part of a messy church, then my friend, the door is there. And I'm going to invite you to leave. You do not need to be part of New Life Church if you are not comfortable with mess. Because if we are people who are going to actually embrace the mess, which means loving people, then the church is going to be messy. And if it's not messy, we're doing something wrong, which means we are putting a standard up which is so high, where people who have to be perfect or they have to behave before they can actually belong. We're going to make something and expect something of people which was never expected to us, because when Saul got knocked off his horse and the bright light, and that was a perfect opportunity for him to be pummeled by God, it didn't happen. And when Saul was there in his blindness and helplessness and a perfect opportunity for Ananias to stick him one in the back, it didn't happen. So we cannot do something that didn't happen for us. We're only saved by grace and mercy and kindness. That's the model. That's the only model. We cannot do it any other way. And so that's the way we're going to do it. We're going forward, and that's the way we're doing it. And if you're not happy with mess, then you need to leave and find somewhere where you can be by yourself with a bunch of other people who think like you, look like you, and are perfect like you, because that's not what we're really after. Okay? I hope that makes sense, and you catch our passion here with this is where we wanted to go with this whole freedom series, because if we're the people of God fighting for something, fighting for people, there's things that we have got to fight for, and we've got to get it right, and we've got to stop being stuck in civilian matters, and it is costly. It is so costly, and it's hard work. It isn't tidy. It's costly. It costs Jesus everything. It costs to love people, guys. Come on. And we're fighting insecurities and heartaches and depression and anxiety, and we're looking and aching for people who are far from Jesus to find the same mercy and kindness that we've received. That's really what we need to be about. Really what we need to be about. And the way Paul talks about it, he talks about it like this. He says, like your physical body, your skeletal system, your bones, which are in here, your nervous system, which allows me to feel things like hot stuff, and respiratory system, reproductive system, all these systems that our natural bodies have been made with, those natural systems are your support systems. If I had no skeletal system, I would not be standing here. And Paul uses that language. He talks about the local church, the specific church is your body. Your local church is your body. That's your support system. Each one of you is accountable for one another. Each one of you is the defender for one another, the supporter for one another. Yes, there might be moments when you need a bit of extra care, but this is not all about you, because there's moments when you need to care for somebody else. Because that's how my body works. The natural human body needs to work that way to be healthy. So does the local church body. That's how Paul talks about it. And there's strength in numbers, because one day you might not be able to sing, and somebody like this morning is going to sing for you. And you might not be able to just pray, because whatever's going on in your life, and you need a brother or sister to pray instead of you, pray for you, pray with you. There might be moments when you just can't even breathe, and someone's just going to come alongside and just breathe and be with you. We are the support system for one another. It's a radical the way he talks about the local church. And maybe there's a day coming where you're going to be support for somebody else. And maybe there's pieces that are not as effective because you've checked out. So if you've checked out, don't check out. Engage. Get stuck in. Please. Be strong. And it's not in our own abilities. It's not in our own talents. It's because of grace and strength of God. God's not giving you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. It's not in our own ability. It's not in our own strength. We need one another, and we need God's Spirit to help us. Because the cool thing about when you choose to follow Jesus, he helps you follow him better. He doesn't just say, follow me and figure it all out for yourself. He says, follow me. My Spirit's going to help you. My Spirit is going to just be with you and guide you. Okay, spirit sounds weird, but it just means his presence, because if he was in a physical body, he couldn't sit with every single person in this room. So he talks about it like this: my spirit, my presence will be with you to help you as you figure things out. And you don't have to only do it with me and my spirit. I've actually put you as part of a body, so the body's going to help you. So we don't do any of this stuff on our own. We don't do any of this stuff on our own. Therefore, what does this kind of army look like? What does this look like? We are freedom fighters with a cause like no other. We don't fight with weapons of words. No, we will not fight with weapons of words. We don't need petty arguments or rhetoric. We will not fight with weapons of guilt or fear or shame. We won't do that to people. We don't fight that way. We're not going to kick down doors and try to prove how powerful we are by flexing our muscles and force people to comply or behave. We're not going to do that. We are an army that believes that mercy triumphs over justice. We believe that forgiveness sets you free and that love is stronger than hate. We are an army that does not rely on our own goodness, our talents, our skills, abilities, our kindness, our self-actualization, whatever you want to call it, my own higher plane. We are not going to be people who rely on those things, but instead we heal the world by humbly relying on the grace, the mercy, and the kindness, the work of Jesus, the things that he has done for us, is doing for us, and will do through us. It's just because of Jesus that we're able to do these things. And our army will not be made up of the strongest or the fittest. It will not. It will not be made up of the youngest and the healthiest. We're going to be the most ragtag looking army that you have ever seen in your life, because we're going to have the younger and the older. We're going to have people on wheelchairs on the front line as well as people in prams. You know, I mean, we're going to go youngest to the oldest, because let me tell you what, in the kingdom, there's never, ever a moment when you become so old that you stop being valuable. Never. Never. We're going to be the male and the female. We're going to be those from all nationalities and all cultures. See, this army is going to be different because this army recognizes and supports one another as equals as we serve one another for a greater cause, not civilian matters, but a greater purpose. And we're an army that's going to run into the battle because we're going to face the mess. We're going to address the mess. We won't avoid the mess. Okay, I'm sorry, you're with someone, they bring up an awkward situation, an awkward conflict, they say they're hurting, and then we say, oh, that's very nice, and walk away. Come on, we're going to be people who just dive in and embrace the mess. We weep with those who weep because sometimes life is heartbreaking, and we're going to rejoice with those who rejoice because sometimes life is a big party. That's the kind of army that we are going to be. We are going to be an army that gets our hands dirty in our community. We will not be afraid of being contaminated because Jesus never was afraid of contamination. He put his hands into community and into people's lives, and he didn't get contaminated by that. He healed that. So let's not be afraid of it. I've not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. You see, we can do this because of what Jesus has done for us. We will be an army with a voice that cries out for the oppressed, the abused, the underdogs, the write-offs, and the disregarded. Nobody is write-off in the kingdom, and nobody is damaged goods beyond repair in the kingdom. End of. That's what Saul learned. Saul made so many mistakes. We all make mistakes. We've all got a history. But Saul learned that his history did not define his future, and your history will never define your future. An encounter with Christ changes everything about your life, changes the way you live, and it changes the way you love. It changes you. It's not just an idea, oh, God is a nice person. No, it changes you. It changes you. We are an army that brings freedom to others, true freedom, because this is true freedom. When people learn to live like this is true freedom. This kingdom of God being extended into people's lives, that brings true freedom in people's lives. And this is what we are about. This is the army, the specific local army called the church. This is us, specific people in a specific place for a specific purpose. It's time for us to think about the local church differently. It's not a place for us to be made comfortable. It's a place for you to be made battle ready. Okay? This isn't like holiday club. This is boot camp. This is a place to be made ready. Yes, you will find healing in the local church. Yes, you will find support. Yes, you will find strength. Yes, you will find love. But it's not for your comfort. It's because we believe you are more than the hurt you're experiencing right now. It's because we believe that you're more than the ache that you're going through right now. It's because we believe you're more than whatever trauma you've faced right now. That's why you're being loved and cared for and supported, because we believe you will be battle ready again. That's what we are about. We have something worth fighting for. We have something worth fighting for. We are freedom fighters. And it's nothing like what the world thinks of when they hear the word freedom fighters. Nothing like that. Because we're going to conquer the world in a totally different way by dying to ourselves and giving our lives for others. I said at the beginning it'd be good for you to lean in if you're not yet following Jesus, because this would be a great opportunity for you to see what it really means to commit to following Jesus. And following Jesus is a total change for your life. And it's not easy. It's totally not easy. You don't have to do it on your own. We want to do it with you. We want to walk with you. We want to journey together with you. Being a soldier means you're part of the army. You can't separate the two. So we got to look out for each other. We got to look out for you. Maybe you need to be reminded again. Maybe you're sitting here and watching online, or maybe you're sitting on site, and you needed to be reminded again what the local church is about. Maybe over this last 18 months, it sort of drifted a bit. Maybe there's just been a little bit of a reduction in what you thought the local church is, but the dream of the local church has never diminished. In fact, our mandate is more clear than ever before. If we were looking for need, the need has gone up. So why do we need to know what to do? Because the need is greater in our communities. Don't get entangled in civilian matters. The purpose of the church is greater and stronger and more clear than ever before. All of a sudden, the whole world knows how important community and relationships are. We've known that for thousands of years. Come on. Or maybe you've liked the idea of being a Christian, but just not being part of a church. I get that. I know loads of people like that. Loads of people say, I like Jesus, but I don't like the church. I'm really sorry, but you can't separate the two. If you're a soldier, you're part of the army. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, we're going to expect you to be part of the local church. It doesn't have to be our church. You can go and be stuck in, it doesn't matter where you go. But if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, we expect you to commit and be part of what it means to be a local church. Because this is our support system for one another. This is the army. And maybe you've been happy to separate the two, but you can't separate the two anymore because it's not possible. It's not the heart of God. You don't separate the things that it says in Ephesians that he gave his very life for. Christ loved the church and gave his life for her, says Ephesians 5:25. Maybe you need to be reminded that you're part of something and we need you just as much as you need us. Maybe you felt like you weren't needed. I don't know what you were thinking this morning before you came in. Maybe you just needed to be reminded how important and valuable one another are, how you are to us and how important we are to you. The local church is God's chosen way to bring hope to the world. God's plan for our local communities is local churches. It's a no-brainer. It's his simple plan. We need to be a place to reach our local communities. We bring love to the world, one neighbor at a time, one colleague at a time, one family member at a time. Whatever your front line is, we bring love into those settings, and we bring the kingdom of God in local church settings. And maybe today you need to have your passion for the local church reignited. If you want to know how to get involved, all you need to do is think of that phrase there: gather, grow, give, and go. You commit to gather, small groups, big groups, whatever it is. You gather because we're all invited. Everyone's invited. And we grow because we all are learning. We give because we all have something to contribute. And we go because we all have a story to tell. If you want to know what it means to be part of a local church, this is what we want you to do. Gather, grow, give, and go. You commit to gather, you commit to grow, you commit to give, and you commit to go. It really is that simple. Gather, grow, give, and go. If you want to know how we do discipleship, there it is. Gather, grow, give, and go. Maybe you just needed to be reminded or challenged again about what that means. But if you're watching this morning or if you're in the room, I want to do one more thing, and I'm going to ask you something huge. And this is a massive ask. This is a massive ask because it will cost you everything. I want you to consider following Jesus. I want you to consider what it means to surrender your life to become a follower of Jesus. You might not be ready to make that decision today, and that's totally okay because it's a huge decision. It will affect the rest of your life. It's a huge choice. It's a massive decision. And I can't make it more comfortable for you because it's not a comfortable thing. It's a big thing. It's a huge ask. Jesus loves you so incredibly much, but he's never going to violate you. And you're allowed to make choices. You're allowed to make decisions. The invitation is there to say, come learn more about Jesus. Come and discover more about Jesus. But God loves you so much that he's not going to violate the fact that you are allowed to make a decision and consider this. And I'm going to make a big ask. I'm asking you to consider this today. Jesus didn't come to make your life comfortable or perfect. He actually came to give your life purpose. And if you choose to follow Jesus, you automatically are welcomed into the ranks as a soldier in the army. You give your life in obedience to your commanding officer. You join the army. The challenge is for all of us to go all in. And I got to tell you this now as well. You're considering following Jesus and you don't know how it's going to work out. None of us know how it works out because we're all learning and we're all discovering what it means. You just take it one step at a time. We're going to go into a song of worship now, which sings, it's an older hymn actually, and it talks about what Jesus has done for us. And while that song's playing, if you need to make a decision today to follow Jesus, then I'm going to be standing over here on this side of the room, and you can come and just have a conversation with us, and we'll talk to you about what that means. We'd love to journey with you. If you're online, you can put a comment on the chat, and we've got people that are ready and willing to get involved. But maybe during this song, you already are a follower of Jesus, but you've been reignited again about what it actually means. And you begin to discover, wow, I preferred comfort over the commission. And maybe while we're singing the song, you just need to say, right, I'm giving up civilian affairs. I'm focusing again on what it means to be a soldier in the army. And let's not choose comfort over the commission. I'm going to pray now. We're going to go into that song. If you want to know more about following Jesus, I'll just be standing over here. And then after our song, Sam's going to close up the service. Father, thank you so much for just your kindness, God, your goodness and your grace. God, we see it time after time and time. We look at those stories and it tells us how even Saul was met by your kindness and your mercy. That's what you extended and that's what your followers extended. God, help us to be like that. Help us to discover that. And God, if we're in a place where our eyes need to be opened again, if you need to meet us with a bright light and startle us or shock us again, then please do so. Wake us up from the things that we've got stuck in. And I just pray for anyone who's in the room, Father, or watching online that's considering what it means to follow you. I thank you so much that you're speaking to them now and that you're helping them and that you're guiding them. Father, help us to run to the mess in life. And in your name we pray. Amen.
There is no more for heaven now to his. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing, all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark, but I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior, he will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need his power is displayed. To this I hold, my Savior will defend me. Through the deepest valley he will lead. Oh, the night has been won, and I shall overcome, yet not I, but through Christ in me. No fate I dread, I know I am forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and he was raised to overthrow the grave. To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my plea. For the chains are released, I can sing, I am free, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath I long to follow Jesus, for he has said that he will bring me home, and day by day I know that he'll renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is on thee, Jesus. All the glory evermore to him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me.
Amen. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Joel, and thanks to the team for leading us there. What a great message and a stir. What a call to commit to. Something we can definitely keep thinking about in this afternoon and the coming week. Just fantastic. Just before we close, just want to highlight one of the ways that we're able to be together over the summer. So if you're here with us on site, you can pick up one of these leaflets off the table over there if you haven't got one already, and we'll post this out on the email list next week for those who are online. But just some details of some excellent socials, just a safe way for us to gather and just to be together, just to share stories, just have time and space to see people's faces and catch up. What's happened, what's going on, how can we continue to stand together and build and encourage one another. So do look out for those. It'd be great to see you there. If you do have children in a moment, please remember to go and collect them from over the road. But I do pray and hope that you have a fantastic week, whatever you've got coming up, expected or unexpected, that you would know that God is going to be with you every step of the way, and that as you commit to this community, that we are with you as well. So God bless you, and we'll see you again next Sunday.